Today's speaker, Ralph Nader, a consumer advocate extraordinaire, has devoted his life to causes that are important to all of us, and yet we sometimes feel helpless when we're confronted with these situations. He has created organizations and tools that we can use to protect ourselves and others from corporate negligence and government interference. He continues to expose and propose remedies for things that can threaten our free and safe society. In fact, I think that Mr. Nader has defined the verb citizen. Tireless and persistent are words that describe Mr. Nader. He's been recognized for his work by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century, and by The Atlantic magazine as one of the 100 most influential figures in American history. Mr. Nader entered public service in 1965 when he took on the auto industry with his book, Unsafe at Any Speed, and we may need some additional help in that area, given some of the recalls that we've been hearing about lately. Following his success with some of the auto industry issues, he was instrumental in creating the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. There are so many laws that impact the quality and safety of food, water, and air that are a result of his activities. Through Ralph Nader's efforts, citizens groups such as the Center for Auto Safety, Public Citizen, the Pension Rights Center, the Disability Rights Center, and the Student Public Interest Research Groups were formed, and they allow millions of citizens to become actively involved in important issues. Most recently, Nader helped to start Single Payer Action, which is seeking to provide comprehensive health insurance for all Americans, a very timely topic. In addition to being a consumer advocate, Mr. Nader was a presidential candidate in 3 elections. He first ran for the president as the Green Party's nominee in the year 2000 and has run as an independent candidate in 2004 and 2008. And he did this to build a foundation for a 3rd political party and to promote a robust, progressive, populist political movement built around issues instead of empty slogans. He's the author of numerous best-selling books, and his newest book is Only the Super Rich Can Save Us, and it's available, I think, in the back after the talk for purchase, and I think he is willing to autograph as well. You're in for what may be a life-changing experience this morning. His message is simple and compelling. I quote, "To go through life as a non-citizen would be to feel that there's nothing you can do, that nobody's listening, that you don't matter. But to be a citizen is to enjoy the deep satisfaction of seeing the prevention of pain, misery, and injustice." Programs such as this one come about because of the work of lots of people. You saw one of them who was up here, Professor Soderberg. And in this case, faculty members and staff have been busy with the last-minute publicity because of our winter pause last week, and I thank them for their commitment and the work, even though we were all stranded at home. However, it was a Montgomery College student, Theodore Eftimiades, who demonstrated leadership in setting up today's presentation. Theodore is an example of Mr. Nader's premise, I quote, that the function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. It's now my pleasure to invite Theodore to the podium to share some of his remarks and a personal perspective on Mr. Nader.
Big crowd. So, I first became acquainted with Mr. Nader at the Green Festival last semester in Washington, D.C. I approached Mr. Nader and asked if he would consider speaking at Montgomery College. Mr. Nader told me that he did have an interest in speaking at colleges on principle and to contact his administrative aide. Unbeknownst to me, there were flyers right in front of him that read, "Do you want Ralph Nader to speak at your event?" So I immediately felt very dumb asking the question. But I took a flyer and I headed home. Did I want Ralph Nader to speak at my event? Yes, I wanted Ralph Nader to speak at my event. The problem was I had no event. So I mulled that one over for a while and came up with this. I wanted to start a political philosophy club. I wanted to bring intellectually provocative speakers from not so conventional political ideologies, and I wanted them to address the student body. I wanted people to come in on their own free will and leave with an expanded perspective. I wanted to help people and help myself learn to critically analyze ideas and institutions that we may otherwise blindly accept. That would be my event. And so I contacted Mr. Nader's administrative aide, Mr. Matthew Zawiski, who has been nothing but essential and helpful throughout this process. And 4 months removed from first contact, I'm standing at this podium with my dream transpiring around me. I cannot, however, take credit for this event. I took a course in concepts of social justice, and once I shared with my professor, Dr. Tulin Levitas, that I had an intent to bring Mr. Nader to Montgomery College, she introduced me to another member of the peace and justice community, Dr. William Soderberg, and they offered to take the lead on the effort to host Nader at Montgomery College. I effectively handed the event off to them. I did what I could to pitch in, but this event today is their doing. So I would like to thank Professor Levitas, Professor Soderberg, John Daniel for his help, and the entire peace and justice community. It's collaborative efforts like this that make me feel like the possibilities at Montgomery College are endless. And so now we are here, about to listen to one of the most influential Americans for the last 2 generations, and an inspiration to me. Any man able to not just survive, but thrive in what can be a hostile, and unresponsive environment has heart and dedication of a special sort, a sort that is all too uncommon in men. It takes unfaltering trust in your own morals to do what Mr. Nader does. I am deeply inspired by Ralph Nader and anybody who upholds his or her ideals against resistance that might seem Goliath at times. We are indeed very lucky today, and it is my great honor to be able to introduce to you Ralph Nader.
Thank you very much, Theodore. You're wise beyond your years. And thank Provost Ackerman and Bill Soderberg, and all the students and faculty administrators who made this happen. My brother, years ago, started a community college in Northwest Connecticut, so we grew up with the idea of a community college. And it was always more than just a trade school, or a school where you get skills for jobs, which is very important. It was more than just a transition to a 4-year college. It was a community college, and the humanities and social sciences are very, very important in this. And those of you who are desperate to get employment in a recessionary period and want to develop a skill should always leave some time for studying history, anthropology, sociology, economics, and the humanities. Remember the 100 people who wrote our Constitution in 1787 in that hot big room in Philadelphia. None of them, to my knowledge, were stagecoach construction and design specialists. They were people steeped in history, comparative politics, jurisprudence, the frailty and virtues of human beings, and necessity for checks and balances. And given their time, they pulled off a pretty good document, at least made it amendable for women in slavery to be prevented, women being given the right to vote later. But I want to make that point because I've been to a lot of community colleges over the years, and I talked about a lot of different things like the fraud of multiple choice standardized testing, which pigeonholes students in a framework that isn't substantiated, right to Earth Day. But I've never seen a peace and studies initiative at a community college. There may be, I'm not aware of it, there are over 1,200 or so of them, but you're to be commended for that. The subject today is, of course, on peace and justice strategies, and can some super rich save us? And I want to convey this in as equitable a way as I can, but we all grow up learning American history that is replete with omissions, distortions, and lies and myths. I was just at a memorial event for Howard Zinn in Washington, D.C., Busboys and Poets restaurant, which will be on C-SPAN probably several times. They were there. It was a 3-hour event. And of course, one of the things Howard Zinn, who is a professor of history, is known for is for the book People's History of the United States, which is now in History Channel series, DVDs, and so on. And I hope it's used here at the community college, because just think how women were treated in American history. I mean, we grew up being told that our country's a democracy and women couldn't vote. Most places around the world, we wouldn't call that a democracy. And we grew up thinking that slaves lived relatively happy, bucolic lives on the plantation, and the masters treated them fairly. We grew up thinking that Columbus discovered America. When I rushed home one day as a little kid and told my father I just learned that Columbus discovered America, he said, "I thought there were a lot of people there to receive him." So it was that ethnocentric type thing. And of course, we really didn't study the corporate ravages that affected and destroyed so many workers' health, safety, and economic opportunities. So most countries are that way. In fact, all countries are that way. They really don't look at the reality of their history. They are stunted from doing that by manipulation of symbols, flags, anthems, patriotism, support the soldiers, etc. Just let's examine all that, because we are now in 2 criminal wars of aggression, where one country's been blown apart that never threatened us. To be sure, it was ruled by a brutal dictator, but he was our ally for many years, as you know, because he was anti-communist. So we encouraged him and helped him invade Iran, where each side lost 500,000 soldiers and was a stalemate. And he was our anti-communist dictator. And then he made a mistake of invading Kuwait and threatened oil, and we turned against him and drove him back. And then, of course, in the 90s, there was sanctions imposed on Iraq, which didn't bother Saddam Hussein. He had his health care, his pharmaceuticals, his food, but it cost 500,000 Iraqi children's lives because of certain very serious materials were not allowed to be exported to Iraq, including chlorine, to decontaminate drinking water. And this is after we destroyed some of their electrical and drinking water plants in the Kuwait War. So when we talk about peace and justice, first of all, we have to have self-respect. It is not enough to have knowledge. The people who changed this country for the better had knowledge that a lot of people had. But these people were unique because they had fire in their belly. They had what psychologists call today emotional intelligence. In other words, they really wanted to apply what they knew. They really wanted to confront injustice. They just didn't know it. Most people in this country know who runs this country. It's a bunch of corporations and their government allies. It's called the corporate state. The corporate state means that our government is controlled by corporate power, corporate economic power. You saw it with the bailout. You see it with the way the budget is allocated, etc. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a patrician, was worried about this in the 1930s, and he sent a message to Congress in 1938 asking for a commission to investigate concentrated corporate power, which Congress responded to and gave to him. That's when Congress worked. And in sending the message, he said, quote, "When government is controlled by private economic power, that is fascism." Now, that was before Mussolini and Hitler gave fascism another image. But the technical definition of fascism is private economic power controlling our government and essentially turning our government against its own people, whether by neglect or more affirmative action, and using government to service a few giant corporations and a few very wealthy interests. In so doing, it affects the educational system. So obviously, the plutocracy or the oligarchy, they want students to go to college, and they want students to go to community college, because if they can change the curriculum in colleges and community colleges into basically vocational education, they are getting taxpayer-supported and family-supported job training, free. And so the schools are full of computer science and computer courses, aren't they? You all have an opportunity to learn how to use the computer. But do you have an opportunity to learn how to be a skilled citizen? Do you have an opportunity to learn that when somebody tries to stuff something down you, push you around, disrespect you, rip you off, endanger your health and safety, you know how to fight back? Do you learn this in the school? I went through the best schools in the country. I never had a single day that taught me how to be a skilled citizen, how to practice democracy. And the tuition was pretty high, too. Law schools don't teach it. Medical schools don't teach it. Undergraduates, colleges, community colleges. There are about a dozen colleges that teach it. UCLA now has a program. Some community colleges that we've been at have started a program. It's very simple. You don't have to build a new building. No labs are necessary. Just all the material that is available, textbooks and how to put on press conferences and how to organize people and how to fight City Hall and how to propose an agenda and get it into the electoral arena, how to run for office at the local, state, national level, how to use the Freedom of Information Act of Maryland or the U.S. government. All these and many others tend to open up the educational arena so that the community is part of the educational arena. You study the community. You study the community you're in, or the state, or the country as part of economics. When you're taking chemistry or biology, one of the things you can do is study the drinking water laws and standards and the technology of drinking water. Some of you may have read the Washington Post a number of years ago. For years, people were drinking water from the nation's capital with very elevated levels of lead. And it took 4 or 5 years for it to be exposed, when it should have been exposed immediately under the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974, which we got through Congress, if that act was being enforced. And so a lot of mothers who were pregnant at the time learned that their children had elevated levels of lead, which affects the mind as well as the rest of the body. So when someone asks you, can you write a 1,000-word essay on your athletic ability or lack thereof? Can you write a 1,000-word essay on your social life? Can you write a 1,000-word essay on your academic skills? But can you write a 1,000-word essay on your citizen skills? Because if you don't become a more effective citizen, and you are multiplied tens of millions of times throughout the country, you will see a continual slide of our country that has been going on now economically since about 1973, which was the top real inflation-adjusted wage level in the history of the United States. And since 1968, our economy has doubled in size and productivity, and still the average wage today is less than it was, inflation-adjusted, than 1973. And still we have more people in severe poverty and middle poverty than ever before. And still we have 47 million people without health insurance. And still we have 1 out of every 3 workers making Walmart wages, $7.50, $8, $9, $10, $10.50 an hour before deductions and with very minimal benefits. And still our companies are hollowing out communities and shipping jobs and industries with U.S. government encouragement and subsidization to fascist and communist dictatorships abroad, like China, who know how to keep their workers in their place at 50 cents an hour. And still, we vote for those two parties who are calling the same corporate interests for money. They're dialing for the same corporate dollars. They're gridlocked in Washington. They almost automatically reelect themselves because they gerrymander the districts to be either Republican or Democrat, and they keep out third-party and independent candidates through a whole variety of state exclusionary laws, ballot access obstructions, etc. And still, we spend endless hours watching screens in our spare time, which is less and less as more and more people have to have two jobs and commute longer and longer, and still we don't get angry. Now, if we do not get angry, and I don't mean wild rage where you lose control of yourself, I mean a kind of moral indignation that opens up your mind to the elaboration of your conscience and to a quest for another kind of information source than what you're getting when you watch the normal cable news shows or radio or TV shows. And I want to give an example of the Iraq War. The Iraq War started with the drumbeat of Bush and Cheney, as many of you remember, right after they were elected and after 9/11. That Bush was determined for a variety of parental reasons, messianic reasons, and who else can add to it. He wanted to do what his father didn't do, which was topple Saddam Hussein. And not very interested in domestic problems. He never really was interested in the woes and problems of the American people. He was a very belligerent guy from the beginning. He was a draft dodger. He got contacts to get him into the Texas Air National Guard, which wasn't about to ship out to Vietnam. He supported the Vietnam War as a young man, but he wanted other young men to go and fight, kill, and die there. And using his name, he became a figure in the Texas Rangers baseball team. And then someone said, you know, you look pretty good, George W. You know, your father's was president and had other posts. Why don't you run for governor? So he ran again against Ann Richards for governor, using all the usual symbols, and he won. He had a miserable record as governor, especially affecting the poor. He had the lowest Medicaid support rate of almost any state in the country, affecting children, for example. A man shorn of any type of compassion who adopted the slogan, compassionate conservative. And so Orwellian newspeak started, and he takes on Al Gore, who should have landslided him, this bumbling governor from Texas who couldn't read 3 sentences in a row without a teleprompter. And because the Democrats lost their own sense of identity, wavered and waffled and didn't know who they were, Gore couldn't even defeat him in the debates, and the rest is history, as Gore, in my judgment, won the election, but it was stolen from him from Tallahassee's shenanigans in Florida all the way to the Supreme Court, which had no business making that political decision in the first place. Now we come to 2002, and the drums for war against Iraq start getting beaten. Now what's happened is there are 3 countervailing forces that can stop a president from going into a criminal war of aggression. One is the media, the other is the Congress, and the third is us. And so he put before the American people, with the snarling Cheney in tow, he put before the American people 3 reasons for going a war against Iraq. One, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. False, he had no evidence for that. The UN inspection was about wrapping up before he aborted it and invaded Iraq. They couldn't find anything either. Number 2, he said that Saddam Hussein was a threat to his neighbors and could send unmanned aircraft over to the United States to bomb us. False. Saddam Hussein was a terrified dictator, didn't know where he was going to sleep in any given night, presiding over a dilapidated army that didn't have any spare parts because of the embargo, and had soldiers that didn't want to die for him. False. Saddam Hussein was also, if he became aggressively wild with what he had left, was surrounded by 3 countries who could wipe him out in a weekend, and that was Turkey, Iran, and Israel. So no threat. False. The third argument that was made is that Saddam Hussein is connected to 9/11 and Al-Qaeda. That was about as false as you can get. They are mortal enemies. Saddam is a secularist, and Al-Qaeda is a fundamentalist approach. And there was no evidence of it whatsoever. The last thing he said was, well, Saddam Hussein could get a nuclear weapon. I mean, he wants one. Therefore, he could get one. So therefore, we have to stop him. Well, all of the arguments about yellow cake from Niger and Africa and so on, they were all turned out to be phony. The New York Times had to apologize for a phony page 1 article. Building a nuclear weapon is a very difficult thing. You have to get parts from all over the world. We had a constant embargo. We had our spies in Iraq. We had surveillance, etc. All right, so the premise to go to Iraq was made up of lies, false statements. All of these confirmed in so many ways that I'm not going to go into any detail. They were confirmed by even the anti-terrorist special assistant to George W. Bush himself, and he came up, quit, and wrote a book, as well as many other people. Now, that's a rather serious demonstration of presidential behavior. A criminal war of aggression is one that, in effect, says to the rest of the world, we can take our soldiers anywhere, anytime, and you can't. Well, there are people in the world who are going to say, you're wrong. We can take it to you as well. And since you're not being observant of any restraints, how can you say that we're supposed to be observant to any restraints? And of course, those we call the terrorists don't have as much to lose as we have. We have a lot more to lose. We have a lot more to lose as a nation because we have a lot more possessions, and we're not willing to commit suicide. So the platform going to war was false statements, deceptions, lies, cover-ups. And then why did the media buy this? The media is very concentrated. The Truth came out with Democracy Now!, it comes out with Pacifica Radio, it comes out with The Nation magazine, Progressive magazine. Those have very small audiences. The national television networks and the Yahoo cable programs bought his line, hook, line, and sinker, and actually accentuated it by inflaming the emotions of people who were willing to believe what the President of the United States said without any skepticism. The media then fell down on the job. They now look back and they realize it was one of their darkest moments of failure. In fact, some newspapers even apologized publicly for their performance or lack thereof. What about Congress? Now, I remember the Constitution saying that only Congress can declare war. The Founding Fathers did not want another King George, think of the irony, to plunge our nation into war. They wanted a deliberative process. They didn't want someone going off half-cocked and plunging a nation into war. They were very foreseeing in that respect. But they were because they had just gotten rid of King George and all his wars. Now, the last time Congress declared war was in December 1941. Just think of that. It's been in the Korean War, it's been in the Vietnam War, it's been in the Kuwait War, the Iraq War, and a assorted number of other conflicts. So basically, that provision of the Constitution has been de facto repealed. Congress has a War Powers Act, which is another way of saying, well, Mr. President, we're going to give you the decision as to when to start a war, and then you can come back to us for ratification. As if once the soldiers are overseas, anybody in Congress except the Dennis Kucinich and a couple others are going to stand up and say no. And presidents know that. Congress has abdicated its constitutional responsibilities. And that's not the only time it's done that. It does that as a way of life because it doesn't want responsibility. It wants to hand it over to the president again and again. Even the budget is initiated by the president. Congress, of course, is the most powerful branch of government under the Constitution. It's the first branch. It controls the taxing power, the budgetary power, the war power, and on and on. But it's given up so much of this without even an issue becoming part of a presidential campaign every 4 years. It's not even discussed. Now, the Founding Fathers never dreamed that when they separated the powers between the courts, the Congress, and the White House, that any of the branches would willingly give up their authority. They thought it was against human nature. And that's why they didn't give us any power as citizens to challenge it in court. Because if we did file in court and say, Bush, you have violated the Constitution, you have initiated a war without a congressional delegation, the courts throw the cases out saying you either do not have legal standing as a citizen or it's a political issue between Congress and White House and we're not going to mess with it as courts. They're going to have to work it out themselves. And so we have left the people. Where were we? We were wallowing in our own sense of powerlessness. The seeds of dictatorships come from the sense of powerlessness of the people. And we know that in 1930 Germany, where an elected member of the Reichstag named Adolf Hitler, remember, he was first elected, started taking over, strong army, this and that. And the German people, very educated, very sophisticated, lawyers, doctors, engineers, scientists, academicians, just were too busy to pay attention. Just like our academia around the country. We're just too busy to pay attention. And our law schools, with few exceptions, like David Cole at Georgetown, we're too busy to stand up for the rule of law and constitutionalism. They're just too preoccupied with their teaching and their writing and their lecturing and their promotional desires and their self-censorship. Most people don't like censorship, but let's face it. The mother of censorship is self-censorship. It's when we keep things to ourselves that we would otherwise like to speak up and talk about. And in your own lives, in all our lives, from little itty-bitty things in our families, all the way to the big issues confronting the world, cultures produce self-censorship. The antithesis of freedom, which Marcus Cicero defined as participation in power. Have you ever heard the definition of freedom like that? Where did he get that kind of wisdom over 2,000 years ago? Didn't have email, didn't have telephones, didn't have the printing press. Freedom is participation in power, political power, economic power, media power, educational power. How much freedom do we have by that definition? It's always tossed around by politicians. They love to talk about freedom, and they love to talk about liberty. They don't often talk about justice, notice. I once had to suffer reading through all of Ronald Reagan's speeches, which would amount otherwise to cruel and unusual punishment in other contexts, and I never heard him say the word justice. Justice is a provocative word, because justice immediately, when you hear it, you say, yeah, you know, I was just ripped off, or I was pushed around, or I was done in. But freedom and liberty, see, that's rah-rah imagery. So where were we in 2003 and up to March 2002 up to March 2000? We were spectators. We were either believers of lies and deceptions with the drumbeats of war, or we thought maybe Bush and Cheney were getting very aggressive, because 50% of the people were against the war at the time that it was launched. Can you imagine? With only one viewpoint going through the national TV day after day, with the Democrats falling down on a job and not providing another side to this Iraq issue, with a propaganda day after day after day, still 50% of the people were opposed to it. That's reassuring. But they didn't think they had a voice. They didn't think they had any power. So why spend your time? You got better things to do than engage in futility. And that's where the self-respect comes in. That's where you got to say to yourself, which is implicit in Theodore's words, that you are a citizen. And a citizen means that you don't just go through life taking care of your private lives. That if you go through life just taking care of your private lives, and you don't go through life taking care of your citizen lives, your private lives are going to be more deprived, economically, socially. You're going to spend a lot of time commuting instead of modern public transit. You're going to worry about whether you can afford surgery or go to a doctor because you're not insured. You're going to have to spend more and more time on 2 jobs and Walmart wages. You're going to have to breathe dirty air and contaminated water. You're going to have to spend every minute of your life worrying about the next minute or the next day with economic insecurity and watching your job or your industry shipped abroad to dictatorships. And it'll get worse. It'll get worse. We haven't begun to see how worse it can get until a couple years ago. Who among us ever dreamed that trillions of dollars of taxpayer dollars and obligations would ever be deployed, often without even a congressional hearing or a congressional enactment, just weekends where big banks went to Washington in secret, met with the Secretary of Treasury, met with the Federal Reserve Chairman, and came back Monday morning, Citigroup, bailed out by the taxpayer, without even a congressional minute being involved, bailed out with $350 billion of guarantees for their weak notes and $45 billion of preferred stock, compliments of Uncle Sam, meaning you, over a weekend. Because, if it goes over, it'll bring down the economy. Who allowed these companies to be so big that they couldn't be allowed to fail? And we had to bail them out. That's not capitalism. That's corporate socialism. As my father once told us, he used to ask us questions. And one day he said, what's the difference between socialism and capitalism? And, we had all kinds of answers. They never were the ones he had in mind. But here's how he defined them. He said, socialism is government ownership of the means of production. And capitalism is corporate ownership of the means of government. And that's what we have now. Now, how could we have stopped the war in Iraq? This is where the rich come in. It's often said that societies cannot turn around and become more just for their people unless the people rise up. Well, eventually, that is true. They've got to get more engaged. Sometimes it's done by revolution abroad. It can be done in other ways, of course. There are thousands of possibilities. Notice the 6 months before the invasion in March 2003 of Iraq. Over 300 retired generals, admirals, high-level officials in the CIA retired, in the NSA retired, in the State Department retired, ex-diplomats and ambassadors. So you had ex-military, ex-diplomats, and ex-national security officials came out against the war. Colonels, generals, admirals, former cabinet secretaries, people like General Bill Odom, who was the head of the National Security Agency and a four-star general. People like Admiral Shanahan, like General Zinni, a Middle East expert, they all came out against the war. They got their op-ed in, or they got their paragraph in a Washington Post story in, or they sometimes were interviewed on radio and TV, and then they went back to what they were doing. Now, there was a man in New York City who doesn't know how to do anything but make big money speculating. In fact, in 2007, he made $3 billion in 2007. His name is George Soros, S-O-R-O-S. He was an immigrant from Eastern Europe. As he likes to say, he fled both communism and fascism. He came over here, and he went into the stock market, in effect. And he's very good at it. But he's a very enlightened man. He has funded a lot of citizen groups through his Open Society Institute. He funded a lot of groups after the fall of communism in Russia, Poland, Hungary, Ukraine. And he came out against the war in Iraq. In no uncertain terms, I might add. This was not just an off-the-cuff. He wrote op-eds, he gave interviews, he came out against the war. Now, no one knows how much he's worth, but let me put this before you. Had he connected with those 300 people, had he organized them with the Secretariat, had he put them on national television, had he facilitated their move into congressional corridors, had he provided them with $100 million, their numbers would have tripled in a month to 900. You think Bush and Cheney could have faced down ex-generals, admirals who fought real wars, faced down seasoned ambassadors knowledgeable about these countries, faced down people who worked in the CIA and NSA? Do you think the media would have ignored that if there was an infrastructure backed up by $100 million? What is $100 million to George Soros? The problem is he never envisioned it. He never imagined it. And people who tried to tell him it could be done didn't get their calls returned. That's why I wrote that work of fiction, Only the Super Rich Can Save Us. It's a story, fiction, of real people in fictional roles, like George Soros, Warren Buffett, Yoko Ono, Ted Turner, Phil Donahue, Paul Newman, William Gates Sr., Ross Perot. In this book, they decide enough's enough. They're not going to go into their advanced ages and let this country go down. That they're going to get very serious, and there's a big difference between being concerned about justice and being serious about it. And they meet in Maui in January 2006 at the invitation of Warren Buffett, who was worth $50 billion. And they had three characteristics. One, they were very rich. Two, they had a record of being reasonably enlightened during their business lives. And three, they were advanced age when they had a different perspective on life other than just piling up money and concentrating corporate power. And so I put them in this situation where they decide that they're going to put billions of their dollars and raise billions more to mobilize and organize every community in the country, every congressional district in the country. And they're going to do it by putting on the field thousands of community lecturers, thousands of community organizers. They're going to field candidates through a clean elections campaign party. They're going to buy up television and radio stations so they form their own network, so they don't have to worry about ABC, CBS, NBC. They're going to get the best minds in the country for every job that had to be done, and they knew how to pay them. And they're going to do it in 1 year because they agreed that the faster you get things changed in this country that are long overdue, like full Medicare for all, living wage, reforming the tax system, cleaning up the election process, the faster you do it, given that the majority of the American people already want it done, the faster you do it, the more likely you're going to win. Where if you stretch out health insurance from Harry Truman to now, the insurance industries, the drug industry, they know how to game the system. They know how to delay. They know how to game the system. These people, which I called meliorists, people who want to improve things, these 17 knew their opponents, big business. That's where they came from, most of them. They knew the warts, the vulnerabilities, the vanities, and they knew how to take them on. And about in the middle of the year, the counterattack comes from big business because the whole country is aroused by what these super rich people are doing. And so there's a collision of power. And I'll leave the rest to your imagination and reading. But this is written in such detail that it could be part of a civics course or a politics course in terms of how to take on power. And I had to do it in a fictional way because if I did it in nonfiction, no one would believe me. You have to do it in a fictional way to elaborate the imagination. People in the literary world call it a practical utopia. That's what this kind of writing is about. It's not a novel. And I remember when I was your age and younger, an English teacher said to me, "Why don't you read this book by Edward Bellamy called Looking Backward?" And it was a book that opened up in Boston. It was fiction in the late 19th century. And it projected what America would be like in the year 2000. Well, obviously it was a wrong projection, but it was a utopian projection. But it so excited people that when it was published, the population of our country was about 80 million. It sold 1 million copies in hardback and invigorated the populist progressive movement at that time. It's important to liberate our imagination. You know, day after day grinds us down. Even if things are going okay, we still get ground down and we get tired. And pretty soon we're in a rut and a routine. Routines are important up to a point, but beyond that point, they basically destroy your further creativity and your imagination. And so I urge you not to go through life with the easy rationalization that you can't fight City Hall, so why try, that they're the guys in charge, the few are in charge, so just try to eke out as nice a life as you can within the parameters that are given you. That is the mindset of servitude. That is what encourages the plutocrats to become more powerful and to concentrate more power from you to them. We must believe that people have the power, and they do. When you say, look at the war in Iraq, do you know how many people were fighting to stop that war full time in the United States of America? You wouldn't want to guess. Let me guess for you. 30. Do you know how many people were fighting for full Medicare for all, free choice of doctor and hospital, the most efficient system that would save 45,000 lives a year, who Harvard medical researchers say die because they can't afford health insurance to get treatment? 45,000, by the way. That's a lot of people. How many people do you think were fighting in the last year for single-payer health insurance, full-time? I can't find 15. Now that may be a discouraging rendition of numbers, but I find that very encouraging. Because what if that 15 was 150? What if it was 1,500? And what if it was 15,000? You don't think they'd win in every congressional district? Imagine full-time people. Is that beyond our resources? No, it's beyond our imagination. That's the only thing it's beyond of. When you think what's at stake here in full health insurance with quality and cost control and emphasis on prevention, I like the idea you have a sign, tobacco-free campus. By the way, I've not seen that in any community college. There ought to be a little compendium of where community colleges are first, just to spread the idea. But a lot is at stake here. When Medicare came in 1965, healthcare cost 3% of GDP. It's now 16.5%. And there's no end to it. Before you retire, healthcare could absorb 40% of our GDP, and the military could absorb 25%. I don't know how much is left. Do you know that 1/2 of the federal government's operating budget, not counting the insurance systems like Medicare, 1/2 is military, and there's no more Soviet Union. And communist China, they want our jobs and industry. They're not going to send missiles here. We're doing it for them. 1/2. Are all these issues a subject of your small talk on campus? Any of them? What kind of small talk do you have? Do you realize you can tell the quality of a citizenry just by listening to small talk? In the 1960s, some of that small talk among students was big talk. Some. They had small talk, traditional. And some of it ended up in marches and demonstrations and teach-ins and lawsuits. And some of that small talk transformed itself into opposition to the Vietnam War and making environmentalism a high issue in our priorities with Earth Day in 1970, organized by students in 1,500 campuses. And some of it helped lead the civil rights movement, what is now called diversity on campus. And some of it enhanced student rights on campus. Watch your small talk. Have a higher estimate of your own significance. That's a very important thing to say to yourself. Ask yourself questions that appear to be bizarre, like, do you spend more time looking at the mirror in a given year than looking over Congress? Is that a strange question? Let's see. Your average age is 28, probably, right? As students, give or take. A lot of you have part-time or full-time jobs, as well as going to school here. If your neighbor took 22% of your income, could send you off to war, expose you to toxic waste by others, increase your taxes, and thumb its nose at you, your neighbor, would you spend any time watching your neighbor? Of course you would. That's your Congress. That's the way we got to start thinking. That a government of, by, and for the people takes work, takes time. It takes thinking before believing. It takes self-respect. That's what you have to cultivate. And I'm very happy that you have courses on philosophy here. I think philosophy should be taught to middle school and high school students at a more modest level, to give them a broader frame of reference. 'Cause every day of your lives, the power structure is working you over to such a degree that you accept it without knowing it. Controlling processes you accept without even knowing it. Just like you sign on a dotted line for a fine print contract, don't you? Huh? When you buy insurance, credit card, bank account, buy a used car, you just sign on a dotted line. You don't even feel that that fine print strips you of one of your fundamental rights, which is freedom of contract. Just accepted it. We grew up with it, no question. The fine print says you will not go to court. If we shaft you, you will go to compulsory arbitration. The fine print says the seller can change the terms unilaterally. The fine print is a private law by Visa or MasterCard or Citigroup or Prudential or Metropolitan. Don't even accept it. We accept it without even questioning it. And they do that in law school as well. It's not just undergraduate. So growing up corporate means you grow up accepting power that is very, very disagreeable to your quality of life and to your creative potential to fulfill your life's possibilities. Just let me end on this note. If you want to go further with this, we have some websites, very simple. One is called citizen.org. That's our public citizen group, all the things they're doing, and internship opportunities. The other one is called essential.org. If those of you want internships in civic action groups, what's the website? Ideal? Ideal what? Idealist.org? Yes, idealist.org has an ongoing listing of all kinds of internships around the country, as well as at the federal level. I want to urge you to read outside your courses if you could, because your courses only take your mind so far. I want to urge you to start clubs at community colleges on different matters of gravity affecting your life in the future and your country and your world. And I want to urge you, above all, if you don't have it already, is to have at least one course that's called Citizen Skills 101, where you learn civic history, you learn what's going on around the country in terms of teachers and students connecting with the community for improvement and learning citizen skills, and you learn how to forge the tools of democracy. A freedom of information law to get information from your government about meat and poultry inspection plants and all kinds of things is a tool of democracy. You can learn it in one class, how to use it. That's how simple it is. And you actually do use it. You write a letter to a state agency or a federal agency and you ask for a certain amount of information. So you learn by doing. We're very happy to help you start the course, work with the faculty, administration on it. Oftentimes, there's no real opposition to it at the community level, community college level. It's just one of those things that's at the bottom of the list and never gets done. We actually have a textbook that we wrote because the textbook on civics is so dry and so dull and so devoid of proper names that when you read it, it's like eating a ton of butter without salt. You know, it's just no good. And it's one reason why kids are turned off in high school on civics. So we did a book called Civics for Democracy, A Journey for Teachers and Students, which we're almost out of print of, but we can send you an example. We send you a copy for your library so you can see how much fun it is to connect the college with the community and synthesize a lot of your other courses in terms of practical improvement. So when you come out of Montgomery College, you're not going to simply go through life on your knees saying you can't fight City Hall or you can't take on Exxon. you come out with a level of self-confidence and a higher estimate of your own significance. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
My name is Alonzo Smith. I teach U.S. history, recent U.S. history, and recent African American history. And I have two questions, maybe the same answer for both of the two questions. A lot of people were really filled with hope and inspired by Barack Obama's candidacy. And yet you ran against him. I mean, a lot of people felt this was like a dream come true. I mean, when they saw him, you know, on Inauguration Day. So my question, first of all, is why would you run against him? You know, given the inspiration that he gave to so many people. And then the second question is, how would you advise me? I'm going to lecture about the Obama administration in a few weeks. So what would you suggest I say to my class?
I didn't think this is the last one.
I'm going to be lecturing about Obama
Who
and about
is?
his administration.
Oh, yes.
And so what would you suggest that I say? How would you suggest that I approach the Obama administration in my lectures?
Well, one way is take his promises and see what's happened. Whether he's reneged on them, whether he's been defeated on them, whether he has postponed them. And St. Petersburg Times actually has a catalog on their website of his promises and where they are at any given time. That's always a fairly non-controversial way to see the difference between what he went around the country telling people he was going to do. The other thing is, on the question why running against him, because I don't think the two parties own the voters in this country. We've got a two-party tyranny that keeps maturing and maturing. There's an initiative that's going to be on the California ballot that basically says for state office, listen to this, for state and local office, in all the primaries, with, you know, the Republican candidates, Democrat candidates, third-party candidates, the only people who can go to November on the ballot are the top two vote getters. That means they just get rid of all the smaller parties. So in November, you only have Democrat, Republican, and if they're gerrymandered, you essentially have just either the incumbent Democrat or the incumbent. So the idea of that we, who represent small parties, have to explain ourselves is just a reflection of how we have accepted this two-party tyranny, which is becoming more corrupt and more unresponsive to the American people by the year. And to drive the point home, I ask you the following. The Liberty Party was on the 1840 ballot against slavery. It was the first party in America that went out against slavery, 1840. Now the Whigs and the Republicans, the Whigs and the Democrats were the two big parties then, Whigs and Democrats. Now aren't you glad that some voters refused to vote for the Whigs and Democrats and decide to vote for the Liberty Party against slavery? Or later on, parties that were for women's right to vote. So most of us will say, yeah, you know, it really got the ball rolling, you know. It put it up on the platform. Somehow, in the 21st century, we've forgotten the value of that history. Most of the great political ideas in this country were first launched by small parties. Most of them. 40-hour week, progressive income tax, all kinds of things that we now take for granted, Social Security, all kinds of things we take for granted, started with little parties. Never won an election, but they pushed it onto the major parties. Yes?
Hello, I'm Ashley Mott. I'm a student, and I'm looking to start an animal rights group. I've been doing a lot of reading lately about how animal rights and the way we treat animals ties in with social justice, and I was wondering how you felt about that issue.
Well, first, to take a very pragmatic approach is that when they crowd chickens and pigs together, and they get a lot of diseases, so they have to put antibiotics in their feed routinely, day after day, we're the ones, you know, if you eat those products, you're getting that stuff. you're getting antibiotic residues and whatever else is transferred. Also, you're getting it in terms of the environment because they pile up a lot of manure and dams full of manure and sludges, and some of them break, as one did in North Carolina a few years ago, contaminated water. It contaminates the areas with these big, giant pig farms and chicken farms. So cruelty to animals is a boomerang at our dinner table, number one. Number two, cruelty to animals is a part of human savagery. And you find people who are really cruel to animals. They like to torture dogs and chickens and cats. They're not likely to be not cruel to people or unwilling to support powerful people who are cruel to defenseless people. So those are the two. Now, there are some groups who go further and further, and they want to give basically human rights to animals, and that's for another discussion. But I think the first 2 points I made are pretty compelling to try to turn the system around in that respect. Yes?
David Hall, I'm a professor at Montgomery College. In John Kennedy's inauguration speech, he had that famous quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you, what can you do for your country?" And in the 60s, there were lots of populist efforts toward improving things. By the time of Ronald Reagan in 1980, he asked, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" Because we've gotten used to satisfying ourselves and getting stuff, getting things. And with the expansion of that and the credit industry, which makes us think we can have those things without paying for them, now we're in this situation we're in here. And I'm wondering if you think can be a sea change to turn that around again at this point. Thanks.
Well, you notice politicians aren't asking that question anymore? Are you better off now? That's gone. Yeah, from both parties, they don't dare ask that question anymore. Look at the student loan racket, for example. How many people are on student loans? Yeah, well, again, that's signing on the bottom line, right? I think, actually, forgot your question. What was it?
Oh, do you think there can be a sea change back?
Oh, yeah, can there be a sea change? Yeah, of course. Are you kidding? Here's my favorite figure. If every congressional district, if you turn Congress around, you can turn the federal government around, you can turn the country around, because it involves devolving power, too. Every congressional district has 630,000 people, give or take. What if 2,000 people decide to make watching Congress and making Congress responsive their hobby in every congressional district, and they decided they're going to raise or contribute $100 each and 200 hours free time a year, 200 hours. And they're going to have 2 offices in every congressional district with 2 full-time people taking day by day what they want Congress to do or not do. Bingo. Turn it around instantly. I mean instantly. Congress is still terrified of the people, even though they turn their back on people. Just that, remember that executive compensation roar from the people, these bosses getting all this money in Wall Street, we're bailing them out. They were terrified. But there was no follow-through by the people. And they kept polling the people, and the people went back to their routines. So every congressional district has community colleges, 4-year colleges. There's a lot of talent there. But there's nothing out there organized on Congress. And you've got 535 men and women who put their shoes on every day like you and I, and they are allowing the deterioration of this country. They have the war power, they have the purse power, they have the tax power, they have health and safety power, etc. So let's not exaggerate the obstacles. Bring it down to scale. Can we control 535 men and women back home? What does it take? We don't even think that way. We don't think quantitatively. If we were as smart as citizens as we are as sports fans, we have a great country. Sports fans, they know the record of the players, the strategies, they can second guess intelligently, they know the history of the team. It's incredible, the knowledge and the sophistication of a sports fan compared to the citizen. Most of them don't spend very much time at all studying the candidates that they're asked to vote for. Yes.
Hi, I'm Mark, and you described your new book, Only the Super Rich Can Save the World,
Yes.
in which you described 17 ideal people
Yes.
pulling their resources together to, create a new power in the media, I guess, to educate the people. And you described this as a practical utopia, but I find that term kind of ironic, a practical utopia.
Yeah. That's because we grew up thinking utopia is science fiction.
And so, well, we're talking about 17 ideal
Yeah.
people. And so I thought, well, you're thinking that they're not going to go corrupt, they're going to be perfectly ideal. And you're selling this practical utopia. And I was wondering, instead of this utopia, do you have a different practical, maybe perhaps more viable, method of educating America?
It's a good question. One is that these people, because I created their fictional roles, right? They devolve power. They hand off power to grassroots institutions in that way. They knew they couldn't do it by themselves, but they could jumpstart it. The whole book takes $15 billion, what's happened. You'll see how realistic it is. So that's one. Well, I would like to think there are other ways, but again and again, when we think of 10 ways to turn this country around and X, Y, Z and so on, the thing that we don't have is enough money. Democracy requires money to hire organizers, to get media, to do all the things that are necessary. And whatever way we do to turn around the country, it's going to have money. The rich families funded the civil rights movement. Stern family, the Curry family from Virginia. Abolition movement, a lot of rich Bostonians put money into the abolition movement. We forget that. So it isn't just, foot power and knocking on doors and going to rallies. There's got to be a certain amount of money. So whatever way it's done, we have to address the money factor. Of course, money in politics, look what money in politics does, you see, on their side. So read this book. This other book that's up there is called The Good Fight on How Corporations Control Us, which raises your indignation level. This is the kind of material people in colleges don't study. It's the other reality that isn't studied.
We can take one more question.
Yes. And so, good point you make. Yes.
First question is, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think the philosophy we have on market capitalism has changed. In the past, we used to want the market to work for the people, but I've been reading classical liberal work and libertarian work, and now I see that we become more fascist, as you said, and people have these economic doctrines where they have good intentions, but now they want the government to work for the market. I was wondering how you think that should be changed, because we're told, we need the Federal Reserve to stabilize the economy, but they're only stabilizing the rich. They're not helping everyone else, and they're diminishing currency, purchasing power, et cetera. And I was wondering about what you think about the beating of the war drums right now going on with Iran after Sarah Palin's speech. So.
Yeah, you raise a lot of issues. We could have a seminar on that right there. Just very quickly, we've got to form an economy now where big business has got government to guarantee it. Small business is free to fail. Small business is the only capitalism left. But if you're big, you can take risks with other people's money, pension money and so on, and derivatives and all this stuff. And if you screw up and you're facing the cliff, you go to Washington, if you're, Goldman Sachs or whatever. So what we need to do is challenge the whole process of multinational corporate globalization, because I think history shows that community economics is far superior. And I grew up in a town where I heard the cows, there's 10,000 people. I hear the cows that gave us the milk. The vegetables came from the local farms and so on and so forth. Now we get tomatoes from Mexico or California, just as an example. So let me put it this way in a short paragraph. The more community food we have, the weaker the control of giant agribusiness and the food processes over us. The more community health clinics we have, focusing on prevention, et cetera, the less the power of the drug companies and the health insurance companies. The more community energy we have through wind power and solar, water, et cetera, the less Exxon and Peabody Coal can manipulate us. So you see, that's where we got to start. And if things go wrong, we're more likely to be able to fix it. We don't have to rely on somebody in Tokyo, Shanghai, New York, London to pull the strings on us, who don't particularly care for us. We're fungible. So I think courses in economics should focus on successful present and historic examples of community economics. The more community credit unions we invigorate, so they're real cooperatives, the less power Citigroup and Bank of America have to sink our economy through their reckless practices and to gouge us with interest rates and penalties and fees. You see? So instead, it's going the way you're pointing out. It's going into more and more centralized combination of concentrated corporate and government power at the behest of the corporate power. They're the dominant position. Now, see, when you break it down, you say, hey, you know, we've had these things. Why don't we have more of these things? You got more farmers markets growing now, for example. They're growing by leaps and bounds, direct farmer to consumer. And it's more likely to be produced in the vicinity. The idea we're getting crackers from Sweden and ice cream from Switzerland and water from France or the Fiji Islands. You know, what's going on here? And now we're dependent on energy abroad and so forth. When we have the sun, the greatest source of energy we'll ever have. Can we have just a couple more? I'll try to do it quickly because you've all been waiting. Yeah?
My name's Josh Brody, and I understand that in the U.S. there's a very high degree of ideological conformity, which is kind of astounding for how much we promote ourselves as a country of freedom and all that. But for the control that's beyond our law, like the Codex Alimentarius, which is a committee used to control food through the WHO.
Right.
How do we challenge that?
Well, first, go to the website citizen.org and look up Global Trade Watch, which has dealt with that. That's part of the World Trade Organization NAFTA trade agreements. And the only way we can deal with that is every country that signs on to those trade agreements has a right with 6-month notice to withdraw. And of course, we're a big economy. If we withdrew and renegotiated it so that people are first, then we would change that.
Do we even want to? Because, I mean, it's mainly headed by people like the Monsanto Corporation.
No, of course, Monsanto doesn't want it, and Cargill doesn't want it, and the big food companies have it right where they want it. No, this would have to be mobilization, you know, popular mobilization, focusing on Congress. You see, 535. That's where you got to focus for these things. Yes?
My name is Gerald Garcia. I went through a community college like this about 12 years ago. So I'm glad that this type of education is continuing very strong. My question to you is, to some extent, you talked about the 2 branches of government. I wanted to get your opinion on the 3rd branch, the judicial branch, and the decisioning on basically allowing corporations to give financial donations to political parties. What are your views on what do you think is going to happen in the upcoming election regarding this decisioning?
No, I just wrote an article with Rob Weissman in the Wall Street Journal on that last week. That's the Citizen United case that overturned precedent and law by the Supreme Court, 5-4 decision, very close, and said now corporations can spend unlimited money opposing or supporting candidates for local, state, and national office. Unlimited. So, you know, they have the money and they can do it. So this in a way is going to frame the collision between corporate power and democratic power in a very clear way. So if that doesn't wake us up, I don't know what does. Anyway, you can, there's a lot of good commentary on Citizens United. If we had the the Democrats, if the Democrats opposed some of these Supreme Court nominees instead of rolled over, that did you know that Scalia was confirmed with a 98-0 vote? And I was up on the Hill trying to get Gore, Sarbanes, Kennedy, anybody, just to put one vote against Scalia. And he didn't hide his right-wing views. And they wouldn't do it. 98-0. And 11 Democrats went with the Republicans to get Thomas through, 52-48, when the Democrats controlled the Senate. And I was up there and saw it happen. So, you know, when they complain about that, they had a role in not stopping it. If any of you have some burning questions when I'm out there, where is the desk? When they're signing books, you know, we can chat. These books make good gifts. They make good additions to your educational experience. And if you get one, we'll give you a free one called Fortress America by the acclaimed William Greider on the American military and the consequences of peace. This is free to anybody who buys one of the other books. And stay in touch with us. And remember, a citizen course. We're going to watch and see if you do that. Thank you.
CSRL.
Okay, for these.
Do these three.